Hello BookTube, I'm back today with another video and another installment of our read-along, Wild Swans, Three Daughters of China. This is on the next 5 chapters, chapters 5 through, or chapter 6 through chapter 11, and a lot has really happened. There is, wow. This is all mostly about the rise of communism and the communist revolution during World War II and a bit post-World War II when the Kuomintang and the communists are engaged in this sort of civil war. Young Chang's mother is leading a particularly extraordinary life as she works as an underground agent for the communists to help smuggle information out of the city and help them with demolition projects, things like that. And one thing that always struck me is she's about, 15, 16. Later, by the end of the chapters, she's, I believe, 21. So her life is incredibly eventful as she's really coming of age. And she has these enormous responsibilities, and she's put into a lot of life and death situations. I think that it's really interesting to look at the political climate sort of like right before World War II, then during World War II, seeing what happens and seeing things slightly shift and seeing food rations being scarce and the rise of inflation. And something that some of the commenters talked about last time and that we discussed was how ancient pre-Mao China feels, and it really does. Michael from Knowledge Lost mentioned that, how it feels almost medieval because it's incredibly traditional, very hierarchical, very agrarian, and there's very distinct gender roles, and children are under complete submission to their parents, things like that seem very ancient. And so within just one generation, from Young Chang's grandmother to her mother, things are changing so drastically. So within one generation, Young Chang's grandmother went from being sold off as a concubine at the age of 15 and having no say in the matter to her daughter, who was able to, when she was 15, work as an underground agent for the communists. Like, that's an incredible distinction, and that's something that the mother ruminates on in her own thoughts about what, and she sees that as what communism has given to her. And so during World War II and a bit after it, we see a lot of the reasons why people are attracted to communism, because a lot of the peasants, local laborers and farmers and non-land-owning peasants, they are incredibly, their existence is incredibly frail and dependent upon just a few factors, and if that goes wrong, people can starve, and it's incredibly easy if there's political unrest, if it's a bad year, things like that, and so people are very frustrated. And something that I found really interesting is the way that the Communist Army looked at how they dealt with ex-Kuomintang soldiers who they had captured, who they would give a chance to join their own army, and to how they established the support of the local populations, and that's how they tried to get. And because if you think about it, I mean, the communists were basically just ordinary citizens who, took up arms. And so this war was as much a political one as it was an actual military one, because when you are fighting a local native population, you're basically fighting for people's loyalties and people's hearts. And so seeing the way that the communists did that, and how they wouldn't go for the cities, but they would strategically pick the countryside and talk to the peasants on the countryside and give them grain and redistribute things. It was a very interesting tactic, and I think that's something too that you can definitely look at, like modern warfare or something like that. As I've mentioned, I'm an American, and if you look at kind of any sort of within the past 20th century, 20 and 21st century, most wars are now sort of guerrilla based, and they're just as much political as they are military. Militarily, you get what I'm saying. So seeing seeing how the communists were able to rise to power, because they took people's very legitimate concerns, and which was the mass majority of people who were hungry and starving and cold, and they were able to fuel that into like a perpetually renewable source for their army, which is brilliant. So if you think about it, and anything the Kuomintang did would just piss off the peasants even more, which would just make them become even more fervent communists. So I think you can kind of draw similar parallels between basically everything that the U.S. has done with Al-Qaeda, with Taliban, with ISIS, and look and see how people's righteous anger is the most powerful tool towards turning someone to your cause, I think. So you don't want to give someone that gift of wanting vengeance, because they'll do whatever it takes. That was one thing that I was just thinking about during while I was reading. Again, it was absolutely fascinating to hear, and so from the beginning, where communists are very young and idealistic, and they're winning, and they are, and her mother and her father are very Young Chang's mother and father are part of the army and are training, and how her father is very, very rigid and idealistic about the cause, and seeing over time the way that the communist government has to keep its power, how it has to secure its power, and and how they're gradually, becoming more and more totalitarian and a police state, really. Also, earlier this year, I read a book called Half of Man is Woman, and that was written by a Chinese activist who spent, I think it was 23 years in a Chinese labor camp after he wrote a poem that was deemed to be anti-intellectual because it was seen as capitalist. So he spent more than half of his life in a labor camp, and so reading about the people being sent to labor camps because either they were intentionally against the Communist Party, or because they were misrepresented, or somebody else had gossiped about them unfairly, and being sent to a labor camp, I was thinking about what I had read, which was a novelized account of his life, and hearing and seeing, and that provided a bit of a picture for what their life would be like, what the lives of the prisoners were like when they were sent to these camps. I think the thing that I think interested me was also the anti-intellectual theme of the communist movement as well. Obviously, there was this disdain for capitalism and landowners, but the line wasn't as the line. Or it wasn't as black and white as the movement made it seem. Young Chang talks about her aunt, who was technically an employer, even though because she technically employed two other women to help her with sewing for her small business, things like that, and this sort of adulation of peasantry and of suffering, they kind of swung too far in the opposite direction, which was something I found really interesting, because the intellectual class, or the were seen as the bourgeoisie, or at least I thought that was very interesting, because communism is obviously a very far left stance to take, but you can also see that similar strain of anti-intellectualism in far-right government systems like fascism, this distrust of academia, this distrust of like the intellectual elite. That's something that people in America have talked a lot about. The intellectual elite, like, are you just calling people smart? So there was a lot to digest in this. I'm really hoping that anyone else had similar had some interesting thoughts that they wanted to talk about because, wow, so much to boil, so much to boil down, so much to intake. Again, my life seems incredibly boring in comparison to this. I haven't even toppled one regime yet in my life, not even one. So, oh, I guess it's good that I can live vicariously through Yung Chang's family. Yeah, this is turning out to be much more eventful than I was expecting it to be. I was thinking that it would be similar to the work of Amy Tan, which is, again, it's very, I would say, like, poetic and personal and a bit flowery, and it's all about mythology and legends, and it almost has this touch of magical realism to it, whereas this is drastically different. This is about political upheaval, this is about history, this is about survival, this is about culture, and it's much more fast-paced than I was anticipating. Anyways, let me know what your thoughts are. I would love to have a discussion out in the comment section because, again, so much to unravel about this section. Wow, so much communism. All right, thank you all for watching. I'll see you all next time. Doei!